Renaissance. It was a time of great change in Europe between the 1300s and 1600s. It was the rebirth after disorder and disease had stifled the medieval world. Along with the political, social, and cultural change, a drastic change in art occurred. Before the Renaissance in Italy, there were two distinct types. First was Byzantine art with its rich use of color and golden backgrounds. Next was Gothic art with more animated poses and smaller figures. Both of these styles were flat and lifeless and did not include accurate perspective.
As Europe expanded geographically, artists expanded technically. They used everything in their power to make their images look more real and to convince the viewer of that reality.
New Renaissance themes focused on depicting the beauty of nature, understanding light, shadow, and perspective, which created a trend towards realism in the arts. Instead of painting on canvas like many of today's paintings, most Renaissance artists used a technique called fresco.
After the plaster is applied, the design is transferred using cartoons, drawings on paper. The contours of the figure are incised into the wet plaster, sometimes using a piece of wood.
When the paint is applied to the wet plaster, the pigments become fused into the wall. This increases the durability of the painting. As we look at Lamentation by Giotto, we can see the different areas of plaster that have dried. It shows how much painting an artist could get done in one sitting. Many pieces of artwork that are iconic in today's culture were created during the Renaissance.
Everything from Michelangelo's gorgeous, immense nude of the young David to Leonardo's Last Supper now have iconic presence in our culture. They're so ever-present in advertising and the mass media that it's a little hard for us to realize that they were stunning, often controversial innovations in their time, that people threw stones at Michelangelo's David as it was transported out of his studio because they didn't think a nude figure should ever be made so large, that people looked at Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling and said, "Who's that guy with the long gray beard?" They didn't recognize the muscle-bound figure as an image of God. Today we take it for granted. But those artists were not just technical geniuses, they were conceptual geniuses as well. And they introduced to us a whole new range of visual art.
When people see Michelangelo's work, they're generally amazed. There's a kind of an inner power, a tension, a strength to them. He can touch a stone 500 years ago and make me feel what he felt. That's pretty impressive.
Michelangelo's David, a scene from the Bible where David defeats Goliath. The sculpture represents the precise observation of the body and advances of perspective, shadow, and detail. David's pose, called contrapposto, became a distinctive feature of sculptures in the Renaissance. After completing the statue, the Pope commissioned Michelangelo to paint in the Sistine Chapel.
Above the tapestries, the walls go up, 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 to a very strange roof, made up of 5 colossal arches that span the chapel and have these gaps in between them through which you can see magically into the past. God creating the sun, God creating Adam, Adam and Eve in paradise with the snake, Noah and his flood. It's the first few pages of Genesis, the Bible for beginners, illustrated by a genius and peeped at through the openings in a roof.
It took Michelangelo 4 years to finish the Sistine ceiling. Later on, the Pope commissioned him back to the church to complete the Last Judgment, which is a painting displayed on the altar wall. This painting depicts glorified bodies and others subjected to eternal damnation, mentioned in Matthew 25:31-46. The loose skin is said to be a self-portrait of Michelangelo. Another artist, Leonardo da Vinci, also had a major role in the Renaissance.
But is she looking directly at us or through us? Is she even looking past us, over our shoulder at something we can't see? Leonardo understood the compulsion we all feel when we first meet someone to try to read their character from their face. He challenges us to interpret her thoughts, to capture, in his words, the motions of her mind and the passions of her soul. But he teases us. He draws a veil of ambiguity across her features. And then, of course, there's the riddle of that smile.
Da Vinci was one of the best portraitists of his time. He was able to capture realism of facial expressions and portray accurate movements.
You only see the profile, but what Leonardo does, it is as if he's calling Lisa. He calls Lisa, Lisa turns towards him, looks at you, and has the upper part of her body looking somewhere else. So it's a snapshot. It is in the middle of a movement. And he's been able to do that, and thus introducing into portrait painting something which existed, of course, in sculpture. This was such an achievement that Raphael and others started imitating it.
Raphael Santi was one of the greatest artists of the High Renaissance period, and probably the most loved period by many people, because the forms and the colors were so exuberant that most people can't help feeling attached to this kind of style. Raphael Santi was one of the greatest who was very good in portraiture, making portraits. He was very good at painting Madonnas, Jesus, baby Jesus, Saint John the Baptist, that no one could ever probably surpass.
One of Raphael's most famous works is the School of Athens. It shows the connection of art, science, and philosophy by painting portraits of leaders in these fields. This includes people like Aristotle, Plato, Pythagoras, and even Raphael himself. Overall, the Renaissance was the first step in showing the understanding of light, forms, and balance. It has had a profound influence on all art that came afterwards.